Good morning, everyone. I think Jesus' point in today's gospel couldn't be more clear. Faith and life must intersect if faith is to be genuine. Our Lord, in response to the question, what is the greatest of commandments, says we have to love God above all, with your whole mind and strength, your whole soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. The two belong together like the two sides of a coin. And that coin is not valuable. It's not worth anything unless the two are together. We can't love God and worship Him and yet ignore our neighbor and not be involved in society. We have to make sure that our life and our faith are one, if truly faith is to be genuine. This coming Tuesday, we will have an opportunity to make our faith intersect with life in a very important way. The Pennsylvania bishops have issued a statement on the elections. And the full statement is available in the vestibule of the church, and if you'd like a copy of it, you can pick one up on your way out of church today. Bishop Barris has asked that all of the priests this weekend speak about that statement and about the elections, not in a partisan way, but as a way to help form and shape all of our minds and hearts and consciences as we exercise a very important civic duty, as we get involved in a place where both faith and life intersect. Now, our bishops, the bishops from Pennsylvania, start off their letter by talking about how important it is for us to realize that each and every one of us are called to be saints. We started this month of November 1st, on the feast day of All Saints. And they tell us that these saints exemplify what it means to love God and love one's neighbor. The saints knew that faith and life intersected. And the elections are a critical opportunity, they tell us, to exercise our civic duty and fulfill our social responsibility in a way that becomes us as aspiring saints. Do you see, in all the choices that we make, especially those that are most important for our world and our society, are places where we live out our call to holiness. No place, no corner of our world is a place where we cannot live our call to holiness. Now, just as kind of a side note, this is not covered in the bishop's statement, but I think that there are probably certain what I would call fallacies or misunderstandings that some Catholics have about their faith, especially when it comes to exercising that faith in the area of their civic responsibilities. I mean, the first fallacy that I'd like to kind of dispel is that some people think that faith is like a coat that we wear. You know, it's just an external thing that we put on when we need it in order to make us feel warm. But when we go to certain places, we just sort of take it off, hang it up, and go about doing our business, whatever that might be. Faith then becomes just purely an external, comforting, protecting kind of thing that is not integrated to who I am as a human being. And I can take it off and put it on as I see fit. No, faith is not that. Our Catholic faith is an integral part of who I am, and it definitely influences my whole worldview. It influences my life and my decisions. It informs who I am, what I do, and the choices I make. Faith isn't a coat or a hat that we put on and take off as we please. It's a part of who I am. And the second fallacy that I think that I hear sometimes is that, and we've heard this too, even most recently during these elections, during the campaign, I don't want to impose my morality on others. Have you heard that? I don't want to impose my Catholic morality on others. The problem with that is this. When we're dealing with essential elements of the natural law, when we're dealing with the right to life from the first moment of conception until death, when we're dealing with things like the very definition of marriage being between a man and a woman, when we're dealing with issues like religious liberty or the right for parents to educate their children, we're not dealing with truths of the faith. Let me repeat that, because I'm quoting Pope Benedict XVI. These principles, our Holy Father says, are not truths of faith. They, rather, are inscribed in human nature itself. And therefore they're common, the Pope says, to all humanity. We're not imposing our morality about life when we say that life ought to be respected in the first moment of conception. That's part of the natural law. That's not just some sort of Catholic principle. That's basic to who we are as human beings. And it's something that can be understood, accepted, and lived by anyone of any faith. And by the way, when we say that we don't want to impose our morality on others, well, what would we impose? Immorality? Is it okay to go down to the local gas station and rob them? If there's a law that says you can't rob the local gas station, is that imposing our morality on others? All law is a morality. All of society needs a morality for order, for respect. Indeed, when as Catholics we get involved in society, we're not imposing our morality on others. And especially when we're dealing with these most fundamental human issues that are not truths of faith. Rather, they are common elements of human nature itself. And then finally, another fallacy that sometimes I hear people say that I think it's important to dispel for us, and that is that some people say, well, you Catholics, you're single-issue voters. Have you heard that? You know, it's all about, sometimes they'll point to one issue like abortion, and you'll say, well, you're a single-issue voter. It's not true. There are many issues that we have to deal with and that we have to decide upon when we enter that voting booth. We're not single-issue voters, but we are priority-issue voters. And what does that mean? Well, there are a lot of issues that we're dealing with that are prudential judgment issues. Issues in which there is reasonable debate, including among many Catholics. Issues like taxes, like the economy, like what to do with health care and how to do it. All of these areas are very reasonably debated among very good, honest Catholics and people in general. These are important issues. But they're not morally equivalent to issues that involve intrinsic evils. Evils that are always and everywhere wrong. Abortion, redefining marriage, religious liberty, destructive embryonic stem cell research. These are things in which there is no truly reasonable debate. They are always and everywhere wrong. They can't be equated with those other important issues because they're morally different. So when we vote, for instance, we have to realize that we're not single-issue voters. However, we are priority-issue voters. We have to look at those priorities, those things first, because they're morally different than those debatable issues. Our bishops tell us here in Pennsylvania that there is a number of problems within our society in which faith is no longer, they say, a presupposition for life in society. Where many thinkers in law, in education, in all sorts of areas like healthcare, They no longer believe, they tell us, in the ideal of inalienable natural rights guaranteed by a creator. And our religious liberty is no longer secure in our society. That's why our bishops exhort us to get involved, to be good citizens of this world in order to show that we want to be good citizens of the next. We can truly be saints by the way that we live as citizens in our society. We have a responsibility, certainly, to our society, to the state. We have a responsibility to build up a good society, which makes, our bishop tell us, which makes our Catholic civic engagement vitally important. But, they tell us, and this is so true, our primary allegiance is not to the state. No, our primary allegiance must always be to God and to God alone. In the statement that the bishops have issued, they say, as St. Thomas More once said so eloquently, we are God's good servant first. That is the nature of our personal calling. That is our human mission. And that is something we cannot forsake without betraying our baptism. Finally, our bishops conclude with this extremely important advice that I leave with you this morning. At election time, they tell us, charity and truth are expressed through the votes we cast in favor of the inherent dignity of every human person and the common good of all. In this respect, faith must inform our electoral decisions. The Catholic faith is always personal, but never private. If our faith is real, then it will naturally and necessarily guide our public decisions and behaviors, including our political choices. What are our bishops telling us? Telling us to get out and vote. Vote because that voting booth is indeed a place where faith and life intersect.